So let me welcome everyone to I believe, the final session for day 2 for this year's Geo-Asesthetics conference. The last one should have been held, as Professor Murungi mentioned, should have been held in Jamaica in conjunction with the Caliban's Reason conference that we would have had last year. But the nature intervened, and consequently the COVID took over, and it was just at the beginning of that, so we couldn't have that. So it's wonderful that we're here, and I have benefited tremendously from the 2 days, even though I had to skip to another seminar which I chaired yesterday, so I joined in the afternoon. Without taking much of your time, the procedure is that each presenter would have 20 minutes to make the presentation, and then we'll have 10 minutes for discussion. I hope that we will keep within that limit. If you can yield the balance of your time and not take the whole of the 20 minutes, that would be great, so that we can have robust feedback and a discussion. Just one correction before we go on. The fourth presenter in this session is Robert Black, not Richard Black. So I'm making that correction, and when I get to it, I'll make the same correction again. So I'm going to invite Alfonso Linges of Penn State University, emeritus professor, to present the singing bowls. Over to you, sir.
Am I on?
Yes.
Am I on?
Yes, I believe so. We can hear you. I can hear you loud and clear.
And you can see me?
I can see you very well.
Okay. Like you, I was marveling over what we were watching on television. In Wuhan, China, the 11 million people of the city were ordered into quarantine. A few days later, as evening fell, people began leaning out of their apartment windows or balconies, chanting and responding, "Wuhan, Jiayu. Wuhan, stay strong." They also sang songs. In Milan, in Turin, quarantined people brought their violins, bassoons, guitars out on their balconies. Their neighbors brought their pans and wooden spoons and their voices. Children and old people danced in the balconies. The streets resounded with songs. It happened in Florence, in Palermo, and in Barcelona, in Brooklyn, in Zagreb and Beirut, in Malaga and Tehran, in Rio de Janeiro and New Delhi. Hundreds of the most skilled musicians, those of the Rotterdam Philharmonic and the Toronto Symphony, the Baltimore Symphony and the Berlin Philharmonic, the Arctic Philharmonic of Norway, and the West Australian Symphony, each musician seated in their own home before a screen, watching the conductor and his baton perform Grieg's Peer Gynt, Ravel's Bolero, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. We in quarantine watched, enthralled, and listened with thousands of distant others. Just before the quarantine, the pandemic and the quarantine, I had spent a few weeks in Bhutan. And as it happened, I had purchased a hand-hammered metal singing bowl. Many years before in Kathmandu, I had acquired 6 singing bowls. The bowl is either struck or a mallet is slid across its rim to produce a clear sound whose overtones sing long along the bowl. I use the bowls in my kitchen, and each time I took one or another off the shelf, I tapped it or ran a mallet around the rim to hear it sing. Sometimes friends who visited improvised music on the bowls. Now one evening, I thought to use the resources of the internet to learn about them. I discovered that upright bowl-shaped bells of metal were already made in China around 2000 BCE. They figure in Taoist and Buddhist ceremonies in China, Japan, as well as in the pre-Buddhist Bon religion of the Himalayan region, which does still persist there. Ideally, the bowls are made from 7 metals, 1 metal per planet: gold, the sun; silver, the moon; Mercury; copper, Venus; iron, Mars; tin, Jupiter; and lead, Saturn. But most of them are made of bronze. I learned that they have been used in a number of contemporary classical music scores, such as Messiaen's Oiseaux Exotiques, Tavernier's Total Eclipse, and Tanduc's opera Marco Polo. I sought out this music and came to appreciate the riches of tones and overtones from the singing bowls. Then I learned that since the 1970s, Himalayan singing bowls have been brought to Europe and America and are used in yoga and meditation centers and in music therapy. These Westerners employ them in their own ways, persuaded of the healing effects of sounds. The tones are sounded to induce meditation and relieve depression, anxiety, migraines, and physical pain. And I thought that that is as it should be, for whatever the practices in Tibet, Nepal, and Bhutan, it is these material objects, the songs they make, and their healing power that is the essential. I marveled at the information. These bowls, which had been in my house for 50 years and which friends have improvised with, are made for healing. Their music is healing music. I kept them now on the table by a window and spent some minutes with them every day of my year in quarantine. Healing music. My mind flew back to the first time when I came upon that concept and practice in the Ottoman Empire, and how much I had marveled over what I found. 2 years after I finished my studies and had taken a job at a university, I spent the summer in Istanbul. One day, as I visited the Süleymaniye, the great mosque of Suleiman the lawgiver, a boy came to me and shyly introduced himself as Mustafa and took me to see the arcade of buildings adjacent to the mosque that housed a primary school, an Islamic school, a medical clinic, a kitchen for the poor, and public baths. It was also an arcaded covered market where the rents paid by merchants covered the costs of these public buildings. Mustafa told me that the complex was designed by the great architect Mimar Sinan. Every other day, we went to see another of the 39 mosques Sinan had renovated or built in the city. At the end of the summer, I decided to take the train to Edirne, near the Greek border, to visit the Selimaya Mosque, the last mosque Sinan designed, and which he and architectural historians regarded as his greatest. Nearby, I went to see the Beyazid II Mosque, built a century earlier in 1488. The buildings in the arcade included a hospital and a large medical school. The treatments and medications were provided free of charge. I lingered in the wing built for the insane. The rooms were large, and each room covered by a high dome set over a circle of small windows. The rooms were cool in those late summer days. They opened upon a central courtyard. The treatment of the insane included housing them in the arms of the mosque and of God. It included the spacious, lofty, and cool quarters. It included medicines, herbs, and water immersion, and individual diets prepared for each patient. In the center of the courtyard, water sparkled melodiously from a marble fountain. The flower garden attracted singing canaries. And in the courtyard, 7 musicians and 3 singers performed for these disturbed people. The hospital was closed by the 1913 Balkan Wars and the Greek invasion of 1920 to 22. Here, music has been an essential part of the holistic treatment of the sick and the insane for 450 years. 450 years later, in 1911, in Crownsville, in Anne Arundel County, they built a hospital for the Negro insane of Maryland. Epileptics and microcephalics were also put there. Built to house 1,100 inmates, it had 2,719 in 1955. The preparation of meals, laundry, and the field work and tending of cattle were done by the inmates. Local farmers collected able-bodied inmates to work without wages on their farms. In 1955, there were 4 attendants in a building housing 560 inmates. The hospital was closed in 2004. In recent years, medical researchers have found that playing and listening to music increase the body's production of the antibody immunoglobulin A and the cells that attack invading viruses and bacteria. It increases growth hormone plasma concentration. Music also reduces levels of the stress hormone, cortisol, and other biochemicals associated with stress. Listening to music may increase the calcium calmodulin-dependent dopamine synthesis in the brain, which reduces blood pressure. Music modifies the heartbeat rate and body temperature, which also modify stress. Stress provokes seizures in persons with epilepsy. Music that reduces stress levels mitigates seizures. Music triggers the release of opioids in the brain, the body's natural pain relievers. Patients who were played music after surgery felt less pain than those who were not, and used less pain medication. Music therapy is used to enable patients after a stroke to walk. Neurologist Oliver Sacks reports that patients even with severe Parkinson's disease in a catatonic state recovered coordinated movements with music therapy. Researchers found that stroke patients who were supplied music therapy recovered verbal memory more readily. Congresswoman Gabi Gifford suffered a bullet shot in her left brain where language ability is seated. Working with a music therapist, she first was able to hum with music, then sing a familiar song, and finally speak the words independently of the music. Music therapy has been used to enable patients with dementia and Alzheimer's disease to speak. And music relieves depression and anxiety, which we have all suffered as we sang from our windows and balconies, and affirms our trust that we will before long be dancing in the streets. The composer Jem Finer set 234 Himalayan singing bowls in 6 broad concentric circles in a lighthouse on Trinity Buoy Wharf in London to play his composition titled Long Player. This composition is based on 6 compositions, each divided into 6 sections. These sections are performed at different pitches and speeds in all the possible combinations. The composer has determined that all these compositions will take exactly 1,000 years to be performed. The performance began at midnight before the 1st of January of 2000 and will conclude on midnight before the 1st of January of 3000. A long player trust has been set up to ensure that it will indeed be completely performed over the 1,000 years. I stopped on that word trust in the name of this institution set up to play a musical composition over 1,000 years. The performance of Long Player had already been going on for 20 years when the pandemic began, and when all our anxieties began about how long we will have to be in quarantine, how long the virus will be silently, invisibly spreading, when the next passerby will infect us with a deadly virus, when we so need trust. Uh, that's it. I don't know how to uh, open it to the questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much. That was wonderful and very powerful. And especially at this time of COVID with the lockdown, shelter in place, and so on and so forth. I believe persons will be willing to make comments, questions. We have about 11 minutes for that. Thank you, Prof. I don't see any hand up. Anybody indicating to, okay, I see Jenkins. Is that the host? Is Professor Jenkins willing to ask a question?
I'm just the host.
Oh, okay. Robert Black? wanted to say something? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to say,
Wow.
we resonate on the same frequency today, Professor. Thank you.
That is wonderful. Yeah. And I believe priceless.
And Ashbrow has a comment.
Yes? I don't see any of them.
Alfonso, this was wonderful as always. You're remarkable. I just wondered, did you use music during the period, and what did you listen to?
Yeah, I certainly listen to a lot of music, but I also,
Play the ball.
yeah, I played the bowls I had. So when I discovered, that they're made for healing,
Yes.
I decided, because I didn't understand that, when I purchased the bowls, and I had just to use them in my kitchen, and now I played them every day during the quarantine.
Is it what I'm trying to think is whether there's a big difference in types of music and types of healing.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the Turks understood that. So in this mosque I visited, and this is an insane asylum, they know we have documents from that period. So they know that for the different types of mental disturbance, they had different musics that they performed. And today, music therapists also understand. Oliver Sacks, in particular, who worked with people with Parkinson's disease, understood that people with different temperaments were helped by different types of music. There are people who all their lives had loved classical music, and of course, they were helped by classical music. Whereas people who had no interest in classical music would perhaps be helped by a music that they had loved or that they now love.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because there are all those studies that they've done with Mozart, and people play the piano concerti for improving their performance in tests.
Yeah.
So I don't know if one would call that healing, but it's certainly awakening.
Yeah.
It awakens something in us that allows us to focus and to be more present to what we're doing.
Yes, I discovered in particular Mozart has been especially used to help people who are coming out of surgery.
Yes.
To decrease the pain that they would feel and decrease the need for pain medication.
Professor Maxis, Glenn.
Hi, Al. Great to see you as always. Thank you for that interlude. Yeah, I'm thinking about, different kinds of music, and, I've always loved the singing bowls myself. And, I'm just thinking about Bachelor and who's always talking about reverberations and thinking about resonances. And, there's something about the bowls to me that speaks so directly to the body. And I'm thinking about, Morangi's talking about, the resonating bodies opening us to our togetherness with all things. And there's something unique to me about how the bowls just reverberate within me and then make me reverberate to everything. I don't know what you think about that, Al.
Well, I think that's very insightful. I didn't think about that, but for example, if we would contrast them with a string instrument, which is more removed from the body, the bowls have a volume and a materiality that other instruments may not have.
Yes, that's what I was feeling and thinking. Yes, thank you.
May I ask a question also? Because different cultures will have probably different things that work on both the physiology as well as the mind of members in terms of meaning construction, in terms of relating to reality. I was wondering if sound in that regard, whether verbal or produced by musical instruments, for example, how it is possible for drumming and various other things to lead people into various different states. I was just wondering about that. In other words, you could, the bowl is a cooking utensil if you wish, but it is also a healing instrument when you move to the other side. And also when you talk about the talking drum in many African countries, it could have therapeutic value, but it could also motivate, energize, or even carry you into superhuman levels if you want to look at it like that. I'm just looking at all the possibilities. I don't know if Prof. Al, if you think along those lines. Professor Lingis?
Yeah, I think about African music that there is a considerable amount of studies that have been made. There was a very a profound book written already, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago in French on music and trance. So the use of music to enter into trance states, which is widespread around the world. So that has certainly been studied. And I think there have been studies of drumming. I'm wondering if they haven't been studied in the Caribbean and in Brazil, where there is a great culture of drums and dance music. As I said in my paper, I just discovered I had these bowls for so many years in my house, but I only discovered that during the pandemic that they were used for healing, And so I studied it on the internet, but I didn't find anything about how they were really used in Tibet and Bhutan and Nepal. So I have the impression that has not been studied very much. At least, I could find no trace of it on the internet. But of course, people working with yoga and meditation centers and musical therapy in Europe and in America adopted these bowls and used them in their own ways without really having researched how they have been used for a very long time. They were first made in China 2,000 years before the Common Era. So perhaps there's a great deal of information about how they were used over there in Tibet or in China and so on, but I couldn't find much about it.
Right.
But I think the power of music, the use of music as a healing function in ceremonies, and one could also think of chants that are used in funerals, for example. That have a consoling and function. I think here and there that it must have been studied, and of course, as you suggest, I'm sure there's a great variety across different cultures.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think the next presenter is Professor Madeline Georgievich from Towson University, and the title is Reimagining Public and Private Life in the Pandemic. Professor Georgievich.
Thank you so much. Okay, so in the time of the pandemic, there has been a renegotiation of boundaries that has been brought on particularly by quarantining. So that's really what I want to talk with you all today about. So the home has traditionally been the bounds of public and private spheres. You have inside the home as private and outside of the home as public. And public and private spheres have been articulated by feminist philosophers in order to locate and, work with inequalities, right? So they serve a particular purpose, but right now what has happened in the time of quarantine is that these lines have been blurred. And there's a sense in which the public world has entered our private homes, and our private sphere has actually entered into the public as well. So the bulk of what I want to talk to you about today is going to deal with Zoom in particular and working from home remotely during the quarantine. So dealing with how the public has entered private homes. Briefly, I want to talk about a little side note of how I've seen private entering the public sphere as well. So again, not the main portion of what I'm talking about, but just a little nut for some squirrels. So the first way that I've seen the private sphere encroaching upon the public sphere is through social distancing. So, we had 6 feet, then we had 3 feet, and there's this sense in which we are now navigating a negotiation of space. And that can happen interpersonally, where maybe you're out shopping and someone comes a little bit too close to you and you say, I need more space than you've been giving me, which is a really awesome phrase my sister told me to use. Or it could be, negotiating and navigating the space with the government and the CDC. So I also want to think too, and it's just a question I'll throw out there for you to think about, who is it that is upset about having their space controlled or dictated to them in order to protect the community writ large? So second way that I've seen the private sphere growing into the public realm is with masking. So a mask gives you a certain level of anonymity. And I want to think about who might benefit from that. And in particular, what came to mind is folks who have to engage in emotional labor for their work. So people who are doing, waiting or retail work, and no matter how horrible and dehumanizing the person is in front of you, you have to smile and you have to keep that smile going. So you're literally being paid to emote and project happiness no matter what you're actually feeling inside. So thinking about the mask as something that gives you some privacy that also does have an effect on labor. So moving into the main core of what I'm talking about today, I want to think about and think critically about how the public realm has entered the privacy of our homes and kind of blurred some of these boundaries. So with Zoom and working from home, we have had to build a public stage within our private homes and from the materials of our personal and private lives as well. So we're welcoming in our coworkers, our bosses, our employees, our students into our personal private space. And this is something that does require, I think, critical and careful thought about that which we wish to share and be open about, and that which we wish to conceal and keep private. So we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. The Zoom background itself is something that I really want to talk about. For me, I started thinking about this as the space of you has grown. So normally when you enter the public realm, you're bringing your body and that what you have adorned it with. So your clothing, your jewelry, your makeup, your hair, whatever things that you carry with you on your person as somehow communicating something about who you are, right? So there's this sense in which we are now renegotiating and recreating our identity because our Zoom backgrounds are coming with us wherever we go as well. There's a sense in which there's this sort of inarticulate aspect to the Zoom background. Gloria Ansaldúa will talk about the immediacy of an image. An image is more immediate than words, and the backgrounds that we create for ourselves will communicate certain values and also expectations within our different interactions we have online. So I wanted to think critically and carefully about our backgrounds, and what really, started all of this was Miss Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, and I started thinking about a background of one's own. So briefly, Virginia Woolf in this text creates a feminist argument for space, that women writers need a room of their own so that they can work without any interruption. And she also argues for a stipend, which relates to what our friend Craig was saying yesterday, the last speaker. So interesting there. But basically what she does in this text is she writes with a stream of consciousness that is constantly interrupted by so many different things. So she's not just telling you, oh, this is what we need. She's inviting you to feel those interruptions as the way in which she proves her point for why a room of one's own is needed in order to do good work. So it got me thinking about a background of one's own and why having some boundaries here might be useful and important for us. So I want to share with you throughout my talk a few videos here and there, and these will just kind of share with you some of and demonstrate what I mean a little bit. So there's that. And here is another one.
On me. Thanks, Connor. Mommy's trying to do a little bit of work. Can you let me finish my work? Hey, let me open them. Go upstairs so I can finish my work, okay? I got to record something real quick, okay? No, he's on the phone. Just give me 5, okay? I know, I need 5. He's on a call, okay? You cannot talk to Daddy right now. Give me a second, guys, okay? Go upstairs. 3, 2, pull in, water rise. Guys, go upstairs with a critical. Connor, give Mommy a minute, please. I'll be upstairs in 1 minute. 3.
Okay. So I think what this shows us is there's a certain value to having some boundaries. And when we're working from home, these things get pretty crossed. So there's a question that I want us to think about if we were to take ourselves to a second to a time pre-pandemic and ask ourselves, how much do we rely on an atmosphere of a location for accomplishing tasks? So this is what I mean by that. Think about a gym, think about a library, right? There's a sense in which when you go to these locations, there's this vibe and atmosphere, and there's a mutual buildup of energy that actually really helps us when we're trying to accomplish those shared kind of goals. So when you go to the library, you see everyone else around you studying, it becomes much more easy for you to do that as well. There's a sense in which there are these spatial, temporal, transitional zones that we had prior to quarantine. So you would get in your car and you would drive to your place of work, you would do your work there, you would come home, you would do, whatever you're doing at home there. So there was this sense in which there was these barriers that also helped us kind of compartmentalize aspects of our living. Now, this has not always been apolitical for feminists. So there's a term you might be familiar with called the second shift. And there, it's the idea that women would go out into the public world, they would perform their job, that's shift 1, then they would come home and perform shift 2 of their work, doing, you know, homemaking, child rearing, cooking, cleaning, all of that, right? So what you saw in those videos is that there are no shifts anymore because there are no boundaries. All of your life has been jam-packed. All of the things that you would normally go out into the public world and do, all of that has been jam-packed into whatever private space you may or may not have had at home. So I have another video for you here to share what this has sort of been like for some of our students.
Oh, and the teacher is like, okay, well, turn your camera on, just mute your mic, just don't be in bed or in the bathroom or like in your kitchen. Where else am I supposed to go? I don't have a game room. I don't got like 18 bedrooms.
Okay, easy now. You can be in your kitchen. I didn't say anything about not being in the kitchen. I just said you need to be in an appropriate place.
Okay, so we can see from the look on her face, she did not realize she was not on mute. So there's all different kinds of boundaries being crossed. And, you know, what we really have here is a dilemma of having, you know, no space, no boundaries, and all of our activities being crammed into the home. So briefly, I think we should take a moment and think about how this is going to impact productivity, mental health. Before, where we were able to kind of have these spaces and places to go and do our things, now we have to do everything in one little area. So things like, you know, people who go to work without wearing pants, you might have seen that. They think, oh, well, I work from here up, so that's okay. And then they get fired. Because of some mishap, or people who have Zoom shirts, which they put on over top of their pajamas when they are in front of the screen for a conference, and then take that off and are wearing their pajamas all day long. There's a sense in which when we get ourselves prepared for these spatial and temporal zones of transition, and we, you know, really get ourselves into those spaces, that can be really, really impactful on us in a number of ways. And sorry if you hear scraping, my dog is sleeping upside down, scratching the wall next to me. So yeah, that's what that is if you hear it. So this dilemma of not having enough space, what this really calls for is having us build. So here I'm pulling in some Heideggerian concepts of world building, of dwelling, and preservation. So for Heidegger, there is no center of a place. There's just a gathering of things in a certain order that communicates the purpose of that space. So habitual human activity is what reveals the meaning of the space to us. So the gym, there's no center to it. It's just the congregation of all of the weights that come together to tell you what you're supposed to do there, which is probably not read a book. You know, you kind of get what it is based on how we dwell. So to dwell in a place is to found a miniature world there. And we gather our environment into that sort of meaningful presence. Iris Marion Young, famous feminist philosopher, takes up Heidegger's notion of preservation, which is a little bit different. She uses that as a sort of feminist interpretation of preservation as an empowering act. So it's not about commodifying the home. It's not about buying and accumulating things. Rather, it is about taking what you already have within your private home during quarantine and rearranging it in a new order to recreate the meaning and the purpose of that given space. So this is what we've all had to do, create this sort of public stage within our private homes and from what we had ready at hand. So one last video here.
All right, so Larry, Robin, Paul, working from home with this whole social distancing thing. I got a message from one of our Facebook viewers, Mark Birmingham. He said, take some Hot Wheels and line them up to simulate like you were showing traffic from the helicopter. And I have nothing else to do. So are you ready for this?
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah, here we go. Oh, this is traffic on a normal Chicago weekday. This is traffic now. There is no traffic, but there is still construction. So IDOT says you still have to be careful and watch for their workers because there is still construction. Got it?
Got it. Right now,
good?
So different people have been creative in different sort of ways at, using what they had ready at hand in order to do and engage in the different aspects of their lives. So the importance here is about creating dedicated space and building boundary in order to get into a certain kind of mindset to achieve whatever task you are trying to achieve there. Now, this is sort of a little bit of a sidestep here, but in terms of thinking about the background in general, we have to make choices about what we want to share and what we want to keep hidden. So in one of the pieces that I worked with for Iris Marion Young called House and Home, Feminist Variations on a Theme, she talks about the experience of growing up in a hoarder household and feeling embarrassed and not wanting to share that with others. So there's many reasons why we might want to conceal our private lives. I can pop off about a number of those in the chat later if you want. There's many reasons why we might want to conceal or hide ourselves. So this is a paper from pre-pandemic by Karen Lawler, but she talks about strategic invisibility as a place for resisting inhospitable dwelling places. So my question really kind of became like, how do we create hospitable Zoom spheres? How do we communicate with what our backgrounds are saying, something that is open, inviting, and, births that kind of connection that we've been wanting, that we might be able to have when we're face to face with one another in a classroom or something like this, but it's harder to kind of create that from afar. So these inhospitable dwelling places and, this strategic invisibility can be achieved in sort of different ways. So one, you have the blank screen, right? And there's a sense in which when you have that sea of blank screens, there's this illusion of sameness, right? So there's a sort of an anonymity there where you're not really sharing much of anything at all about yourself. But there's varying degrees to which you can do that. So you have the blank screen, then you have the fake virtual background where you are there, but there's an image that you have put forth behind you. And then you also have the blurred background where you yourself are in focus and you are sharing the background behind you, but all of the background has been blurred out. So you kind of can't tell. And it honestly makes some people more curious, like, what is that large object in the background there? But there's a sense in which we do have to sort of be careful about these things and think critically about what we're sharing and what we're not. People have had packages in their background, and through different software, you can zoom in and figure out someone's home address by just having something lying around in the background. So it's something that we want to think carefully and critically about, but we also want to think about those values being communicated. So I wanted to think about Zoom backgrounds and the Zoom sphere as, conceiving of space as invitation. It's really a way of storytelling. It's of self-creation, telling your own story. And it really has an impact on the connections that we're able to then make. So what are those kind of implicit things that you're communicating to others with that background you have? So what I take this project in closing to really be is looking at feminist interventions as tools for border dwelling in the quarantine. So all aspects of our lives have come up together and smashed into one another. And we saw that with the mom trying to do the weather report with Connor there. We are dwelling in all of the borders of our lives during that process of quarantining. And I think that feminist scholarship does two things here. It teaches us how to blur lines, how to destroy dichotomies, navigate liminalities, how to transgress imposed limitations. But equally, feminist scholarship also teaches us how to weave, how to engage in that act of preservation, of making home, making meaning, and making soul. So I suggest that in these times, it is actually in recourse to feminist praxis of border dwelling, of weaving worlds together, that we might find the tools that can help us move forward, make space, and make sense amidst the chaos that quarantine has brought us. So that's the close of what I have for you. I have a lot of other further investigations that we can talk about, but I want to make sure I give time for questions as well. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I have a question. I have a question.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so Madeline, what I suggest you do is immediately start working on a book and expand each part of your analysis. But I'm going to just describe something that is in the form of a question comment. First of all, what I think is that a background for understanding the dangers of what you're talking about, and I thought about this during the previous discussion as well, is the mathematization of nature by Husserl. And what has happened is that, quite simply, Zoom has been constructed through CAD programs and algorithms that is channeling all of what you've talked about into a framework that people experience. And so what's going on in today's world is a colonization of how people actually think about what lived experience is. And so to deconstruct the, call it even unconscious structures that people are being introduced to, your footage, each one of your videos shows this, that people are adapting to a technology that has been mathematized and then introduced to them, and they are conforming their behavior to this mathematized model, and that needs to be deconstructed. And so your project is really going at each sort of level of categories you found that will allow that deconstruction to take place, because what's happening is people are just adopting what's going on through this CAD designed algorithmic world that's being presented to them, and they are adapting their experience to that. And without even knowing that what's going on is they're defining themselves through a mathematized technology. Mm-hmm. So your work here is absolutely crucial and excellent.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay, I think also I saw
Anne. Yeah, I think Anne was first and then maybe Marungi.
Yes, no, Maggie Newton. Is that Maggie Newton wanted to say something? Okay, I saw Professor Marungi seemed to have wanted to say something.
Okay, yes, I have a question for, Madeline. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I want to raise the question, and the background of that question is what has been presented by Lingers. All right, the singing bowls. I'm familiar with the singing bowls, but as he was talking, a new thought about the bowls occurred to me. And the reason of that is that the bowl is a bowl because it is empty. And it may be the case, that one of the effects, the bowl is to empty us of all stupidities, sicknesses, all kinds of things that are obstacles, to well-being. In other words, the singing bowl, in a sense, is a medical bowl. All right. There's something curative, therapeutic about it in terms of purging us, cleansing us, whatever it is, that, signs on the way to a tranquility, to a peace, and so on. All right. All that, in a sense, is really a background. It seems to me, that public, space and the private, spaces, all right. This distinction, here itself needs to be purged. There is something pathological about that distinction. pathological in the sense, that it marginalizes, it sets up apart another experience of space, that is neither private nor, private. Are you with me? All right.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that as I look at, history, there appears to be, so much impurities associated with the public and the private. These are really conventional depictions of space, all right? And sometimes we struggle against privatizing space and publicizing space. And it seems to me that contention, there itself, perhaps, covers a more elemental experience of space, okay, that need to be brought into, in the open. And I take it, that the sonority of the singing bowl, itself may be a key, to opening this primordial, speciality that is neither public nor private. Yeah. So that discourse, itself ought to be recognized for what it is, because that distinction is filled with significance, important, things. My place, your place, somebody else's place, and the public, place, right? But that dichotomy itself can be experienced in a way, that obscures a more fundamental experience of space. For example, that experience of space, that opens my body to the bodies of the others without making it public. It is quite personal, right? It is that I'm kind of I'm a little bit paranoid, about that inhabited body, that repressed body, and I thought that perhaps music in itself can open up this space for us, so that we can experience ourselves in this uncanny, unusual way.
Thank you for that. And I do love and agree with what you're saying. And I need to think a little bit more about the connection with the singing bowl. So I'll hold on that, responding to that now. But the reason I'm pulling from these two things is that there's a sense in which some spaces really have not been historically safe for everyone. And there's a sense in which thinking critically about the kind of reproduction of the self as public within a space that, well, hopefully, but not all cases, you can be who you are mostly. I think it's basically a calling for us to rethink self and how we share self with others in different circumstances. And so pulling on the public and private is particularly coming from that sort of history that feminists have used in order to articulate different inequalities, like trying to gain voting rights and working rights and things like this. So it points to a particular thing, but I do in general agree with you that we should just be, engaging in that more in a more so of a unifying way.
Okay. And Ashbo?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madeline. This was a wonderful, wonderful invitation to meditate on this situation. And in a way, I was thinking of Alfonso's space and my space, his background and my background. And the enormous contrast, right? Because I have absolutely nothing as the background except the walls. And Alfonso has this wonderful invitation to enjoy everything alive around him and to hide himself, as it were. He says, I'm in the back, you became background and I became foreground. And what you said made me meditate about this and think, we're both communicating who we are. We're both sharing something. The minimalist in me is coming through because I can't work if I have a lot of things around me because they distract me, they take everything away. So I'm in my working space. I want nothing whatsoever. It's all focused forward. But without your presentation and without your meditation on this, I would have never realized it. I would have just continued, as it were, continue sort of blindly adjusting, as you were mentioning, and just simply saying, okay, I've got to get this task done. It has to be done in this particular way. Let's get it out of the way. And I think what you created is a wonderful space for thinking through what it is that we are undergoing and how we can do it in a soulful and in a healing way. So I'm just very, very thankful.
Well, thank you. That means a
Yes.
lot.
Can we squeeze in Fran for just 20 seconds?
Yes.
I was just, thank you. I was just wondering, what did you think about the idea? I've thought about this because I'm a secret consumer of trash culture, those magazines about celebrities and stuff. And also it's certain things on television that are like that. And what I've noticed is we are trained as, just ordinary citizens, how to be public through these reality shows. And I've noticed also that when people get interviewed, just the man on the street or the woman on the street, for, they've witnessed some event, they're very present and they're very poised in a way that didn't used to be back in the day, let's say, because I think that our culture is training us to be these public people. It's, in a sense, reality TV, we're all in reality TV now in a way. So here comes Zoom, and we have a sense of the ambience that we create. I don't know, what do you think about that aspect? That we are public in a sense, in a way that we never used to be because of this reality culture.
And even growing up with social media, I think a lot of kids have to identify. They're constantly trying to create profiles and share who they are and get likes for it. So I think that it definitely, 90s babies and beyond have to deal with that. And I think that we are going to continue to see how that affects the psyche in different ways. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. We have to move on now to the third presentation after two wonderful presentations. And here, Professor Marcos Lope, University of International Integration of the Afro-Brazilian Lusophony, Brazil. And the title of the presentation is Architecture, Self-Destruction in Bolsonaro's Brazil. Marcos?
Okay. First of all, I want to thank Professor Morungi for organization of this event, and apologize for not having an adequate knowledge of English. I will try speak from the slides. Okay. When I was about 12 old years, I was a Boy Scout in one of the gincanas. My group needed to improvise a theatrical performance. To create anything, it would be too much work. So I conceived my group that the best thing would be to sing the national anthem, national hymn. In contingent position, make everyone stand upright to respect the national symbols. This way, we would guarantee a good evaluation. After all, who would give a low score for the national anthem? The presentation was a fiasco, but it was enthusiastically supported by one of the chiefs whom I considered to be more intellectual obtuse. He was also an evaluator, and along with two women, he was the only one who gave us good evaluations and complained about the devaluation of national symbols. If Samuel Johnson say that patriotism is the last refuge of scandals, Miller Fernandes recontextualized it here. In Brazil, it is the first. Fortunately, I came out of this path of youth invention and not because of Brazilian rock, not by change. The Secretary of Culture of the Bolsonaro government considered that rock pervert the youth, while seeking to resume national values and imitate the classics. It's a short story for beginning my presentation. I try talk some things about Brazilian situation. It's a great risk because you have some discontinuities and some problems, and talk about present. I put I put in the beginning one epigraph from Caetano Veloso in one song, the name Americanos. He said, "And we dance with a grace whose secret not even I know, between the light and disgrace, between monstrous and the sublime." It's a in direction of Muniz Sodré said. The movie, oh, sorry, the slides is good. The film Architecture of Doom by Peter Cohen shows how Nazism condemned modern art, qualifying it as degenerate, depraved, resulting from mental problems, etc., which would be despised and destroyed, giving way to health art linked to Aryan aesthetics values. This judgment is linked to the construction of an image of the German people's body that should be purified and the presence of virus and bacteria. Identified with the disabled, homosexuals, mixed races, Jews, and other groups that should be sterilized, expurgated, exterminated. Thus, a totalitarian hygienist perspective found on racialist aesthetic values. The great principle of beauty is health, affirmed Hitler. It's the parallel when I talk about, when I think in Brazil today. I think in architecture of self-destruction. But it's impossible to address all the directions taken by Bolsonarism. So I try to sketch some examples, principles, and premises about this topic. Today we have 459,000 deaths, about 60% of the population in food insecurity, 15 severely food insecure. It's the Brazilian situation now. I made some concepts to think the Brazilian situation. The first is banality of wrongdoing. Rejecting the image of impersonal, Wells are calling human beings to account is to perceive the banality of evil. Forever, in this place, this attribution takes on a different and complementary configuration. When we resist the mechanical impersonality and assert your difference by imposing your place of power as an instance in which identification, sympathetic or not, can decide what the procedures should be. In the sense, impersonal routines are not crystallized, but bureaucratic opportunities to instantiate decisions using the neutral mask of the system. Also, responsibility is not assumed, and the image of the wells is claimed to explain the non-functions and the malfunctions, maintain an ambiguous attitude regarding its own condition as a superfluous part, tragically dramatized as an imposition of the impersonal or denied in a voluntaristic way, as someone who alone would be able to fix things, dar jeitinho in the misguided machine. In this framework, deviations from formal procedures in case where the performance is considered reparatory, that is far in relation to the perspective or personal loyalties, are considered justified acts. The view of indifference. If the justification for distributive justice makes use of a type of mental experiment that converges with the view of ignorance, your own position with the system, the maintenance of the extreme inequalities make use of daily indifference to the harm caused by the naturalized injustice. The view of indifference is not a mental experiment, but an element of everyday nihilism. Subsidiary liberalism or elite clientelism. Elite clientelism and subsidiary liberalism are synonyms for defending the free market and free competition, talking about lowering tax, but not giving up subsidies and grants from the state, either for maintaining private companies or for buying personal possessions. The last concept term of conceptography is Hobbesian sympathy. To deviate from the mechanistic and individualistic description of society as being the result of the clash of individuals who move only according to their selfish interests, the importance of sympathy, the ability to identify with the feelings of the other or to put oneself in the place of the other, has developed in the philosophical anthropology. Here, Leviathan asks people to identify with the narrative that individual monads, without moral identification or solidarity practice, could be the standard of conduct for the development and modernization of the country. We have some characteristics of the Brazilian government. You look in the same way of fascism, but are not put the end of this identification, at least some characters. Strong nationalism, to respect sexism, it's all the cardápio, all the menu. What I mean architecture of self-destruction. The architecture of self-destruction promoted by the Bolsonaro government paradoxically combines a discourse of unrestricted freedom in which the author is not recognized, the imperative of maximum exploitation of all resources, human and natures, with a posture of submission to and means of the North American Empire capital in a narrative that comes from the Cold War. It's very strong in Trump and Steve Bannon dialogues with Bolsonaro. This discourse of unrestricted freedom justified the primacy of immediate economic interests over the threat of the population's health in the context of a pandemic. This means minimizing the disease, betting on measures without scientific proof and drugs that would work as a kind of early treatment, such as hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and azithromycin, and on the theory of collective or herd immunity, which took contamination as inevitable and disdain restrictive measures and use of masks or even the anxiety about buying vaccines. In this image, you see Bolsonaro with the box of hydroxychloroquine in the same position of King Lear. And this other image, you will see Bolsonarist protesters salute a box of chloroquine. You have the displaced simulacrum, the imitation of totalitarian performance, gestures, and speech in the construction of a univocal shows discourse. But when challenged, it's taken as mere coincidence and intolerance of the opponents. Like the example of Bolsonaro drinking a glass of milk in a live broadcast, a gesture identified with white supremacists, which when contested as a racist gesture was explained as a tribute to milk producers. Or Bolsonaro swims with a crowd in the same gesture of Mussolini. Or with helicopters, flags, and horseback riding like Mussolini. Or now, with the popular falling, Bolsonaro has appealed to the more radical supporters, promoting motorcycle rallies this month in Brasília and Rio de Janeiro, like Mussolini. Parasitism by inversion, in which terms related to human rights, nature preservation, etc., are appropriated symmetrically, but without end creation. In a institutionalized inversion, when you have, for example, in the largest institution fight racism, a Black person who states that slavery was good for the enslaved peoples, or Putin as environment minister, someone who wants to destroy the environment, taking care of feminist and gender agendas, someone who is against those agendas. It's environment minister, Ricardo Salles, accused of working together with people who promote illegal deforestation. When I look for the Bolsonaro aesthetics, we look for the kitsch. We look for some people in mimetic principles of art in the same direction of Nazi party. It's the Bolsonaro's art, for example. But you have the kitsch of opportunistic artists, or for example, Romero Brito. On the other side, I look for some manifestations of resistance for this architecture of destruction. I look for some artists that made movements in the direction contrary of this government. But I look for one or two examples for this representation. This is a Vic Muniz protest for 2020, but I look more to the chargist Arueira, because when he made this cartoon, he's accused of the government and processed by the government. Bolsonaro's culture secretary has fired after a video filled with Nazi symbols. like songs of Wagner and many others. Several cartoonists supported Aroeira by multiplying his cartoon. You find in Instagram, Somos Todos Aroeira, with 100 of others cartoons in the same direction. When we look for graffitis, we have many others manifestations. Hope that Bolsonaro said about coronavirus. So what? What do you want me to do when you have 155 million people die? It's a image of graffiti of Gillies, another image of Gillies, another street image. Another interesting performance is that Marcha Ré, do Teatro de Vertigem 2020. In this manifesto, in this performance, it was a funeral procession of vehicles, which approximately around 20 cars that moved in the opposite direction of usual, in reverse. In it, the driver participants complete a route that starts at Avenida Paulista and ended at the Consolação Cemetery. There, an act was held in the honor not only of the dead for the COVID-19 pandemic, but of all the deaths that the country has been suffering, with the hosting of a flag featuring one of the images that Flávio Carvalho tragically serves, and with trumpeter Richard Firmino playing over the cemetery portico the Brazilian national anthem, but in reverse, also in the opposite direction as the car. In addition, 4 funeral service vehicles were included in the procession, 2 at the beginning and 2 at the end. Closing remarks. The discourse of disaggregation and the struggle of all against all rests on a type of hyper-individualism naturalized by situations of poverty, hunger, and unemployment. The constant thrift of a coup of seems to have little effect on the lives of the people who suffer the greatest effects of this framework of extreme and persistent inequality. In the sense, we need to follow the advice of Davi Kopenawa, Yanomami, and Ailton Krenak, and relearn to dream, to imagine paths of solidarity and forms of existence that respect nature and life itself. The idea of quilombismo, which takes the place of coexistence of diversity in opposition to colonialist values, and the conciliatory discourse of racial democracy, has gained strength in artistic representations, such as in the film Bacurau. The quilombo is the soul of the Black Brazilian population that, as a practice of solidarity and community building, resurface in various artistic, religious, and political forms. It's necessary to reinforce the rhythms of integration that promote forms of solidarity and reinvention of communities. Last, Bolsonaro architectures of destruction cannot stand the altar. The idea of sexual and gender diversity, of racial identity, is intolerable. This is precisely why the figure of Marielle Franco caused shock astonishment, a Black woman, political activist, favelada, lesbian educator, was assassinated in a crime without mandantes, still unidentified today. If it's difficult to bear and make sense of the preventable death of hundreds of thousands of people, but the multiplication of flags, t-shirts, and images of Marielle in the acts of protest against the genocidal government is a mark that she lives. The Brazil of diversity needs to overcome the patriarchal and colonial Brazil. It's images from today in Brasilia and in Rio de Janeiro. That's finished.
Thank you very much, Marcos. That was wonderful. Comments, questions? We have about 5 minutes. I'm trying to see if I can see hands up.
Could we get back to the regular screen? Oh, thank you.
Yes, that's Wilson. You want
Okay,
something?
You know, I've done a great deal of work on cyber warfare, Marcos, and you know, I just put something in the comment about this great presentation because people around the world seem to understand the degree to which neo-fascism, which is some way a misnomer, just means new fascism. The fascism is very evident here in the United States, and it needs to be pointed out in exactly the way that you've pointed it out. And people need to be made aware of this because, you know, when you go through the comparison of Leader and Mussolini, the exact same thing holds true of Donald Trump. And people need to say this because it is something that is so incredible when you see the political situation here. You could think as an American, me as an American, that things couldn't get worse. Well, they are worse. They're worse in your country. And for us to be able to see that, we can start to see the degree to which the neo-fascists are trying to take over the world in a certain sense. And they're doing it in various places. And your presentation really points that out. And it's absolutely wonderful that you presented that to us. I am so glad that we got a chance to see that. It's excellent work, and you need to keep doing your work.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Ashba, Anne, you want to say something?
I hadn't raised my hand, but I agree with what Wilson has said but the power of your presentation, I also found, has the aesthetic element. That is, you actually showed it through art. And this is one way in which the artists not only can affirm life, but it can recreate life out of and take it out of this incredible nothingness into which the banality of all these imitations is taking us. But the other part that I think is powerful too is the rhetoric of the image.
Yep.
That is one of the things that you showed us is it's not just exposing that he looks like Mussolini, is saying when you look like that, you draw people to you because that is what people associate with a certain kind of leadership. So you gave us, in a sense, also the material to understand why so many people followed Trump, because the rhetoric was so powerful that people just lapped it in and followed it. So
Still
thank
do.
you. Oh yeah, 40-some%.
I think the great difference is the colonial posture, because the auto-imperialism. The Brazilian fight against Brazil, against the poor people, against the poor, against the blacks, against the Indians. It's the great difference for Trump and Bolsonaro. The hero of Bolsonaro is a torturer from the dictatorship. It's unimaginable when in the public sphere you talk about his a torturer as a hero.
Yeah, well, the hero of Trump is Trump. Couldn't get any worse.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think we have been advised that we can take a 10-minute break and then come back to the remaining two presentations. Is that my boss, Professor Murungi? That's the advice?
Yes.
Okay, so we come back at 3:40 for the remaining two presentations. Can we do that so that people can, with the presentation before this, we were shown how spaces have crashed. So while people are home, you can grab coffee and, just some snack fresh while we get back at 3:40.
3:40. Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi, Muru.
Yes. Okay. So let me welcome everybody back. And we have Professor Robert Black speaking to us. He's an architect, teacher, facilitator, artist from Vermont. And he will be speaking on beauty endures. Robert, over to you.
Thank you, John. Can you all see this okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Murungi and to everyone else for being here. And especially obrigado Marcos. His work is very dark, but very real and necessary right now. And as we've heard from Dr. Ashbaugh and from others, even Murungi, that there are many sides to these stories, and the darkness of our time also has a trajectory towards the light. Murungi talked about communal wishful thinking. And so I'm going to try to move this space into the kind of idea of communal wishful thinking. It does not deny the darkness or the past, but uses it as a vehicle to move forward. When I first heard about this conference, the first word that came to mind was beauty. I was living in the fear of the time, but I thought maybe there's a way through this. And so I asked myself the question, can the perception of beauty enlighten the human spirit and serve as an aesthetic antidote to pain, fear, and loss in a time of darkness? In this paper, I explore the life cycle of a single amaryllis plant as one answer to this question. My daily postings on social media elicited responses in me and in others that evidenced the power of beauty as an aesthetic antidote that enlightens the human spirit in a time of darkness. This starts quite simply for no one is looking. Beauty unfolding. She extends a small shoot up from her earth between green leafy blades. Her life force asserted itself silently and beautifully. The genetic code of her South African ancestors surged through her, pushing ever upward. Her life-giving light, asserting her present uniqueness, even as she vibrates in spirit resonance with infinity. In this moment, she emanates a force that affects others. In this case, human beings fortunate enough to feel affection for her. This is where I come in, one human being living in the midst of a life-threatening pandemic, watching it spread across my planet, an unseen invader entering the bodies of other human beings, disrupting their life force to such an extent that they die by the thousands, I witnessed this distressing scene day after day on news media. People facing the trauma of a life-threatening virus. I began to absorb the fear I witnessed and feel deeply for those I watched who were caught in COVID's deadly grip. The German philosopher Max Scheler wrote of the nature of sympathy and our ability, as he called it, for fellow feeling. When I ventured outside during the early days of COVID, the usual signals of fellow feeling, especially the emotions we express through our faces, were muffled behind masks. Despite this lack of usual signals, I still sensed that we were sharing a mutual fear of the unknown instilled in us by the coronavirus. This fear of what was to come rippled across humanity through the 24-hour news cycle, coldly tabulating illness and deaths like points and lines on a chart. My innate human capacity for sympathy, where whatever affects one similarly affects another, and for empathy, where I can actually know the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another, touched me deeply, taking in the heartache, misery, and mourning of these other humans. I couldn't help but take on the pervasive feelings of fear, sadness, and grief that gripped my own being and seemingly everyone else's. Even more troubling, COVID year 2020 and the mandatory government shutdowns of society that came with it not only shuttered the usual venues that nurtured my healthy aesthetic senses, art museums, theaters, music halls, they effectively confined those senses to the cloistered environs of the walls of my home. I turned even more inward and suffered the pain of withdrawal from the life-giving aesthetic nourishment of the larger world. The empty streets outside became a metaphor for the emptiness I was feeling inside. I didn't get COVID, but I became infected by this aesthetic withdrawal and caught a soul virus that even a vaccine couldn't cure. Virtual interactions limited the aperture of my sensual experiences to little postage stamp bits and bytes on a computer screen. Unfortunately, I had watched the TV show Hollywood Squares as a kid and was able to develop a sense of humor in my new experiences in Zoom world. Thanks to this timely technology, I was able to maintain some forms of human connection with family, friends, business interactions, teaching, singing in a virtual chorus, poetry webinars, and art events online. Seeing my new granddaughter, Luna, born this January, was a sign of hope. My spirits were improving. I was beginning to heal. One second here. Hold on a sec. I gotta go back a minute. As infinite wisdom would have it, at the darkest days of COVID year 2020, and after 10 months of lockdown, a special gift showed up in a small box in the mail at Christmas, an amaryllis plant. I didn't know it then, but she would soon become an antidote to my COVID-induced malady. Right after Christmas 2020, amaryllis pushed up first one, then another tender stalk, each topped by a tightly wrapped green bud. I saw and felt a tingling sensation. I was empathically resonating with her life force, just as I had been doing with other humans throughout the year. Amaryllis was affecting me as my affection for her grew. I began to feel a sense of hope that life would begin anew. And so on New Year's Day 2021, inspired by the beauty I was witnessing, I turned to the other technology that kept me in contact with others during the pandemic and posted a photo of amaryllis on my Facebook page. I added a simple tagline, "A new year, a new beginning." Immediately, comments from others flew back in response. "Thanks for sharing," they said. "New growth, new determination to continue life on this planet in the midst of this pandemic." New growth, new hope, another said. People out there were responding in sympathy with the spirit of amaryllis that came through her image over the ethereal space I sent out into the World Wide Web. I started posting new photos, watching in awe and amazement how Amaryllis transformed herself into richer expressions of beauty. I was moved, and so were others, as comments kept coming through with each new post. So pretty, they said. Wow, so beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Lovely. And then the magnificent miracle happened. The buds opened, and it was a veritable symphony of beauty unfolding in the form of these amazing flowers. Comment came in that said, flowers are amazing gifts. They give their lives so that we can be filled with joy and love. And then all of a sudden, 2 blooms in 1 stalk. And the posts from those 2 days, January 14th and 15th, were quite incredible. Amaryllis was dancing. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, said Margaret Wolfe Hungerford 143 years ago. Margaret's words echoed across history to me. And I started to realize that as an architect, I had studied some things. There were evidence-based healthcare studies in 2008 by a man named Richard Ulrich and Craig Zimring, who studied the effect of images of nature, either views of nature or looking at nature, that changed the physiology of people in hospital or limited their time staying there. The sciences of eco-psychology started to develop and research was being handled. The Japanese even started a society of forest medicine. And the comments that came back from these posts, of course, had the words, beautiful, wow, beautiful. January 16th and 17th came along. The words echoed again, beautiful, loving the day by day. There's something about the colors, the forms, the symmetry, the openness of these flowers that calls to me and to other people. It's talking to us. It says, look at us, we're beautiful. I am in awe of how these beauties unfold day by day, I said. Some would call this art, created by the master artist herself. The other beauty of Amaryllis is that the cycles of life happen before your very eyes, waning and waxing, old fading into new, on and on. The comments that came in were, good things happen in their own sweet time. And so to everything there is a season. Turn, turn, turn. And Amaryllis was playing that whole symphony out before my very eyes and the eyes of the hundreds of posts that I saw. And as I get older, I can see beauty now in all stages of life. And thanks to Amaryllis's teaching, one of the other comments that someone said was that hope springs eternal. January 23rd came along and things were still changing with Amaryllis. The ephemeral beauty, I thought, was still beauty. And I've been looking at this idea that I love watching the cycles of Amaryllis, and I'm learning how to kiss the joy as it flies, as they said. And so the post that came back from this one from others was, you lift up my heart. Thank you. So somehow this flower in my window, through my own body and being, was transmitted over the ethereal network to others who were being affected by this single plant in this one place. And Amaryllis continued on to show me the cycles of life and death and beauty. Every day endings and beginnings. Bittersweet beauty, I said on January 25th. And then the Amaryllis reminds me that old and new coexist. And I'm grateful for that. It makes life richer and more interesting. January 28th, the old and new blossoms live together, but it's kind of a sacred renewal that was occurring right before my eyes. And it's no accident that Dr. Ashbaugh told us yesterday that art affirms the eternal recurrence of life. And so here we are. no accident that the comment that came back that day was beauty in all things. I continued to January 30th, where the poem by Edith Matilda Thomas resonated for me. There was one of my kin of another day, when the riddle of life defied her powers, and her fretted heart rebelled, would say, I will go out and look at the flowers. And then, of course, someone in the web sphere out there said, I see things more clearly, and these moments in time are so precious. I'm so much more aware of all the beauty around me and more sentimental. I'm grateful for the effect that this single plant has had on so many people. And even when I thought things were most over, new blooms would come along on this plant. Very incredible message of hope. Amaryllis teaches us that just when you thought it was all over, a new beginning. Amaryllis can be quite surprising. And why should I be surprised about this? Beauty seems to occur and renew itself over and over again. No words to express this kind of seemingly endless beauty unfolding, just awe and wonder for the miracle of life as it is lived in each new day. To wonder is nurturing soul, I said, with the twin plants staring back at me. The post that day that came back was, I can't get enough of this. And then on February 9th, I looked more deeply. I said, does art help me notice beauty? Or does beauty help me notice art? Thank you, Amaryllis, for being a good teacher. I'm learning a lot from you. And in my last series of posts in February, waxing and waning, so it goes, ever unfolding cycles, glad to be able to see the world in a flower, or a minute in an hour. And then on February 20th, my last post of this group, time passes, still beauty dances.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. We have about 10 minutes for discussion, for comments, for questions. Professor Murungi, you wanted to say something?
You're muted, John.
Professor Murungi, you need to unmute. All right. Meanwhile, Fran, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just putting my hands over my
Okay.
ears.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can, Prof.
Good. Okay. Anyway, this is not really a question. I don't think that we should burden conferences, by believing that for a conference to be successful, there has to be a question. Well, there's room for comments, right?
Yes,
So we
yes,
should
yes.
be free, to make, comments. Anyway, as I was listening to what Robert, was saying, I was reminded of something that I read long time ago on the Navajo people, of the United States. And I just wanted to share with you this very small passage. It says the following: with the beauty before me, I walk. With the beauty behind me, I walk. With the beauty above me, I walk. With the beauty below me, I walk. From the east, beauty has been restored. From the south, beauty has been restored. From the west, beauty has been restored. From the north, beauty has been restored. From the zenith in the sky, beauty has been restored. From the nadir of the earth, beauty has been restored. From all around me, beauty has been restored. In the midst of the pandemic, let's not believe that this is the beginning and the end of it. This is not the truth. This is not the reality. Above it, beneath it, within it, there is an experience of the beautiful. Thank you, Robert, for the flowers.
Yes. Any other comment?
Thank you for your kind attention.
I have one. Before you go. It's like anybody that's experienced both your work and Fran's work, which we know cross nourishes, knows that in some sense, you are so incredibly receptive in terms of your inner being, that to be so open to having something come into your life and to be receptive to that and actually transform it into what you just showed us is really quite comforting for everybody. And, as I put in the chat, that oftentimes we have a lot more of the sort of artistically oriented presentations at Geo-Asesthetics. And I'm so glad we got to see this because it's really great work. Even in a time of great despair, if you were so open within yourself to be able to let everybody else see your openness reflected through your work, both you and Fran are, masters of that. So, I greatly appreciate being able to see your work. Right.
Thank you, Robert. I just want to say, comment to that. My name was misspelled in the program as Richard, but I have been called that many times. So when Professor Bawaji made the correction at the outset of the meeting, I got a text from Mr. Wilson that said, "Well, I'll be Robert Wilson, and you can be Richard Black." And I do a meditation each day that has a Sanskrit word in it called Hamsa, and the word means breathing in and out. But Hamsa also means I am you. I am you.
Well, I wish more people will think like that.
Yeah.
Because it would make the world such a better place.
Yes, I agree.
I was explaining to someone that You see, the point I mentioned about this thing about the state of nature and the various other theories that we, bandy around in political philosophy and all that, we tend to forget that none of us selected who our parents were going to be, or which country we were going to be born in, or which color of the skin we were going to come out as. And, in the process of living within a culture, we learn all these terrible things, how to discriminate, how to hate, and so on and so forth. But if you were to see each other, see the other person in yourself, and see yourself in the other person, maybe, things might take a different shape. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Any other comment?
I like, the last point that you are making, Professor, Bewaji. And again, I was just thinking about the body, right? For centuries, perhaps bodies, human bodies have been used to separate each other, one another from each other. And one of the wonderful things about the work of art is that it opens everybody to every other body. And these bodies, that are open to each other, they are also a part of the world body, they are part of nature, they are part of the earth. Some of the things that some of you may not be familiar with, this conference series have been running for almost 15 years. And there's a reason why they are named Geo-Asesthetics conferences, because the point is to focus on the earth, all right? The earth that gives birth to the flowers, that Robert just showed, the earth that gives us, the bodies that we have, the earth that is also unifies us. Sometimes people forget, that there's more to geology, right? There's more to geology. When people think of geology, they think of the science, of the art and so on, but the art is also a work of art. There's something aesthetic about the world in which we live. And again, the art, in spite, of diversity, differences, is also one art, yeah? It's just one art that gives birth, to us. So the series of conferences have really been celebrations of the earth, which means the celebration of ourselves because we're the children of the earth.
Beautiful. May I say one more thing, Professor?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Just quickly, this is great, Murungi. I have learned so much from and being honored to be with this group and from all of these, as Fran calls them, heavy cats. But what I'm learning more and more lately is there's this, somebody mentioned the word resonance. I think Dr. Siak was talking about this a couple conferences ago in musical resonance, the music of Confucius, and Professor Lingus also talked about it with the resonance of a bowl. There's a group in California called the Heart Math Institute, which is studying heart resonance. We have these brain fields that have a certain dimension to them, but the heart field is even bigger. And there are neuroreceptors in the heart that are many more now that they realize. And they're studying human resonance, this idea of coherence where brain and heart are aligned in a vibration, and you can actually measure the waves are calmer. And when people across the world are in coherence together, the whole vibration of violence and crime and everything else calms down. Professor Lingus was talking about the 600 bowls around London or wherever that are going to play these songs for 1,000 years. There are people working on a group in India called Oneness, ECAM, is working to create a resonance of people meditating each month on a limitless field of human vibration that's all about this. Geo-Asesthetics is what you're talking about. So you were way ahead of the game, sir.
Thank you so much. So we can have the last presentation, but not the least, for this conference, and that would be by Ms. Tanisha Gibbs from the University of the West Indies, Mona Campus, Jamaica. And the title is Aesthetics of Noise in the Time of Global COVID-19. Tanisha Gibbs, to you.
Hi, good afternoon. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you because
I can hear.
Because of the Zoom space thing, I can't answer for everybody, but I can hear you.
Great, thank you so much. I'd like to also
You're muted now. You're muted for some reason.
Oh,
there you go. You're good now.
sorry. Okay, so I'd like to thank Professor Mungi and Professor Bawaji, and I've enjoyed all the presentation and the seminar. As a member of the diaspora, African diaspora, and student of philosophy and cultural studies, I have a profound interest in space and redemption songs, but I'm not going to be singing to you. So let me just get, in post-plantation and contemporary Jamaican society, the playing of loud music and production of noise discourses are performances and ritual tools for gaining dominance of place and space for people who have for too long been denied a voice and capacity for agency. There is constancy to stress, and one way of gaining the upper hand is through noise. In this essay, I examine the aesthetic of noise within the context of the global COVID-19, aka novel coronavirus pandemic. The discourse of power and dominance over space that characterize the Caribbean colonial history also constitute the contemporary neo-colonial culture and Sparta representations. As Nettiford points out, the Caribbean story is not merely about the arrivals from beyond the Atlantic, but the story of some whose legitimacy of power, supported by gunpowder, scientific knowledge, and a later developed sense of racial superiority. It is a space, quote, where survivors of the journey from shores of Africa were not allowed to be human within their new location, end quote, Bawaji. So in this sense, the Caribbean space and colonial history that it renders are often described as suddenly appearing on the globe. That European colonial powers created Caribbean colonies, they know virgin churches. One, of course, the original Caribbean have been reduced.
I think I would suggest that some of us might need to turn off our video so that the broadband where she is so that we might hear more. Because I think it was a little bit disjointed now. Please go on.
Are you hearing me clearly now?
Yes. Yes.
So these, okay, great. These talks in Lewis' description of the Caribbean are nothing merchandise, but real people with language, culture, civilization, and their space. The practice of dominating space and reducing people to stock or property is part of colonial history that has not faded into the distance of human history, but have re-emerged in dynamic forms with new and creative forms of culture and practices. industry. The idea then is to devise creative means to control this town, this street, or this block that resonate profoundly through popular music, both emotionally and financially. So this has a gruesome history in the Americas, the arrivals of the European slavery, slave trade, colonialism, and the dependence syndrome of the Caribbean state. The performance of playing loud music during 1692 to 1782, recorded by Gardner in Allen's book, The Roots of Jamaican Culture, 1989.
May I suggest that if you wish, you could turn off the video on your device and just probably speak. We would love to see your face, but if that would help us to hear you. Okay, let's try now.
Okay, you're hearing me now?
Yes, a little bit better.
Okay, a little better, okay. Okay, the performance of playing loud music during 1692 to 1782, recorded by Gardner in Allen's book, The Roots of Jamaican Culture, were ways of reaffirming African ethnic identity. So according to Nettiford, the cultural representation of music in the Caribbean from Cuba, Trinidad, and Jamaica, which has an international popularity, has worked to de-marginalize the Caribbean space. So it is no accident that the cultural representation of music to the Caribbean spartal identity is a performance of redemption songs, or at least it was before the 21st century. In any case, Stanley Nair has noted that, quote, Black popular culture is specially tied to the streets, end quote. However, these streets, corners, gully banks, and hillsides as public spaces serve as means for the massive to survive spartal oppression, where few Jamaicans own their own home or property. Thus, space remains a contested sphere of exploitation and dominance. The event of coronavirus pandemic in the Caribbean has restricted movement, limited space access, barricade time through social distancing, curfews, restriction on group events, imposed work from home and study, schooling others. COVID-19, in enforcing social distances, has brought out in an overwhelming way the significance of using music as instrument of empowerment and assertion of presence in the Jamaica Caribbean space through the gruesome performance of loud music and noise that disturbs online home workers, online classrooms, the sick and the elderly. So while the sound of music across space connect participants in a dance venue, equipments like car stereo system, home theater system, or even the large sound system boxes, playing loud music goes beyond personal entertainment to the production of noise, disturbance of the community, and the bordering on antisocial behavior and rank in discipline. These performances and displays are not just personal satisfaction of home entertainment, but they constitute exploitation and temporary expression of those cultural manifestations of the oppressed, finding ways to lay deserved or undeserved claims of power over space. So on one hand, the performer urgently demands social recognition, aggressively assert the presence of the self as a real cognitive being in space and time, and demonstrate the cleavage of access. On the other hand, these production of noise that claim space and give voice to the oppressed denies the people in the Malayan their right to space and their right to autonomy. So within the constraints of lockdown, curfews, and social distancing, engineered by the experience of COVID-19. These effects layers onto an already stressful cultural domain, street news, stressors, irritates, and thereby constituting health hazard. Yet another dimension relating to how COVID-19 has affected the communities in the inner city, densely populated, highly violated, and aggressively disposed residents. When children are home, unable to go to school, adults are constrained to obey curfews or work from home. Yet the adults decide to entertain themselves and the communities with their loud, lewd, and pornographic lazy lyrics, then the entire process of youth development is impacted. Studies would have to be done to understand how much damage has been done by COVID-19 pandemic in conditioning the young to disrespect the rights of others, their disposition to deviance when it comes to cultural matters, respect for women, over-sexualized outlook on life and other social outlooks. In conclusion, it will seem that playing of loud music and the production of noise are aesthetic performances for dominating space. From plantation to post-plantation, the cultural representation of music to and within the Caribbean space was a performance for redemption, a way of claiming, denied, negated, and aberrated humanity from the plantation owners and the inheritors of power in the post-emancipation society, as well as the new surrogates of Western imperialism parading as leaders in post-colonial Caribbean. However, the novelty of COVID-19, social distancing, the complexities of sheltering in place, working, schooling from home, social distancing combined with a desire to dominate space for a people whose spartality and voice are never heard unless there is noise, have created new challenges, both of norms of aesthetics and also of the respect, dignity, and creativity of the purveyors of these reactive responses to the new norms are striving to generate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. I think you can turn on your video now. I believe the participants would be happy to see you, if that can work. Yes, so we have time for questions, for comments, as Professor Murungi said. Comments, questions? Or probably people are still trying to digest that.
Loud noise is loud noise, and the playing of loud music is it's a constant stress here in Jamaica, especially during COVID.
Okay.
Let me, actually, Professor Murungi, one of the things that we would have experienced if COVID had not intervened in the joint conference we would have had last year, would have been an example of what I believe she's speaking about, where we do have what they call sound clash. We would have arranged for participants who would have come for the Geo-Asesthetics conference to go to some of those cultural, to witness elements of Jamaican, what is called dance hall or street parties or sound clash. Let me describe one of those things, which I believe she's speaking about. Someone buys a car and cuts out the trunk, joins it with the back seats, and rigs it up with boom boxes, and is passing on the road, on your road, and the new music that is being played is vibrating your house. Situate that within the context of the plantation, in which you had no voice, and post-plantation where, you know, you live in an environment where the only way you get to be noticed is when you are loud or when you make noise. I believe that's the kind of thing that Tanisha Gibbs is talking about. Oh, actually, here is a card. You can see, yeah, wonderful. You know, I don't think that would be a common thing in, well, I don't know, except where people are having parties which I've not attended in the US. I don't think that would be like a common sight where people play music and you can hear it from 3 blocks away.
It is especially noise pollution during COVID, when you have a lot of persons working from home, university students doing online schooling, primary school, high school students. You have the elderly, and persons use their car, like that creative cart, just any of these small devices, and just playing loud music, because you cannot socialize, you can't go to your neighbor, you don't have regular dance. So all these various devices become a way of saying, I am here, I'm still alive, I'm, you know, it's reaching out, it's conquering space, it's making noise, but it's disturbing persons, especially during this time.
Yes, Professor Wilson?
So
Yes.
Yes, you wanted to comment. I see your mic is on mute.
Oh.
Oh, okay.
I must have unmuted by accident. Well, you know, in some sense, it's kind of interesting to think about the way in which the, I guess it's a theme I'm beating to death today, but it's kind of interesting to see how different kind of practices sort of migrate. You know, I don't think that we've seen so much noise pollution here, but certainly there has been a history of noise pollution of this sort at previous times. I just haven't experienced much of it in terms of COVID. Maybe I live in the wrong part of the city, but it's certainly the case that when you start thinking about the avenues in which the technology allows people to do what's going on there, as in some sense I don't know what you'd call it. Is it something you'd call a protest? It's certainly a political statement of some kind, which was not previously possible because things were too carefully controlled. So in this case, you know, some of the comments I've made have been kind of basic about how the technology is repressing us, but maybe what this does is give rise to a new form of expression, which some people might not like very much. But on the other hand, what it does is the technology actually serves a positive function in giving people a voice that they didn't have previously.
Yes, yes. Yes, Professor.
Yeah, from the inception of this series of conferences, the goal was to provide a forum for aesthetic voices, you know, from different parts of the world, from different, you know, cultures, you know. So Tanisha, this is a wonderful, you know, contribution, you know, from the, you know, Caribbean. And because of the emphasis on diversity, you know, that one finds in this conference and the other, you know, conferences, again, it is welcoming to have Brazilian voices, just as we have, you know, today. You know something, it's not a good thing to be eating the same food every day breakfast, no lunch, and dinner. The culinary world is really huge as well, and it's nice, to try and get together and enjoy
Feel all right.
enjoy each other's voice. And this is also why from the beginning of this series of conferences it was decided that there is no academic discipline that is going to be dominant, and aesthetic experience itself is not going to be restricted to the academia. We bring together architects, painters, people who are interested in the world of aesthetics, regardless of whatever it is, that they're doing. I thought each one would be enriched by the multiplicity of experiences, kind of flower links, that again allows, for celebration of life itself.
Yes. Thank you. Madeline Georgevich.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about if you found that there was any way in which all of this noise actually fostered community in a positive way at all. Like I can totally see how it'd be very disruptive and difficult, but had you seen any instances where people maybe gathered around it and danced together, that it brought people together and fostered community in any way, or was it just totally disruptive?
A paradox. Okay. Usually in Jamaica, every day there is dance. So every day there is party and every day people gather together. So that is a norm for Jamaica. The difference now in COVID is that you're not allowed to have the dance, have the gathering. And dance and party don't mean you have a designated venue or area. These dances are kept on the streets, on the corner, at a gateway. So it's quite public. So COVID and the curfew have restricted that movement. So what people do now is to play the music loud at various hours of the day from 5 to 11, 10, 8 o'clock in the night. So you have just different people participating in expressing themselves and letting the other person know that, well, I can't visit you, we can't dance together, but here I am, I'm still here. And so, well, you might have one or two friends might sneak over to their friend's house and might dance and so, but you don't have the large gathering. So it's more like the music becomes, the loud music becomes that way of saying I'm still here and sharing together in a sense of a community. But the disturbances is that it happens every hour, any hour of the day, and there's no, I mean, so loud. And it happens from different devices and different houses. So it's quite like crickets in a garden, or, just various things playing with you. So, but it disturbed online life, space life, I guess.
Yes. Okay. Any other comments? Fran?
I just wondered if there's a conversation about this at all. Are you the only one speaking about this or is there some sort of critique of it, or are people annoyed other than those who are doing it?
There is a law, noise abatement law in Jamaica, but this happened before COVID, so it shows you that Jamaica has, like I said, every day there is party, so we are conscious and know about these various noises. But during COVID, yes, I do hear persons who have teachers that are not able to perform their duty because of the noise. So yes, it is our persons, but I don't think it has become, I'm not sure if it has become a national issue, because what is more important now is trying to get to COVID.
You may want to off your video again.
Finding a joy. Oh.
You may want to put up the, yes, and speak. I think it's the bandwidth problem we are having.
But one of the problem with the music is the type of lyrics that is playing aloud, sexual and violent music, so that children are now home, so they are now hearing a lot of adults content. So that's another issue.
How are parents managing that? Because that is really, really awful when you have a small child and they're learning words that you don't want them to know yet. How are they managing?
That's a good point. How are they managing? There's little you can do if somebody has their music very loud and wants to entertain. Wants everybody to know they're here. This is why I said they're claiming space. They're letting you know that they're here. They're trying to cope. So you just have to try and cope with them. So it's dominant. It's dominating space. It's dominating space without your consent.
Yes, maybe I can give my own experience in my own neighborhood. For example, it's usually quiet, but occasionally you will hear a vehicle drive by playing the kind of music that makes your stomach begin to do some gymnastics and all that. But now a neighbor probably decided that he was stressed and needed some relaxation. And, usually I don't think I ever heard loud music from that particular house. But this morning, the gentleman just decided to entertain everybody in the neighborhood. And I guess that is part of the kind of things that COVID brings to bear on people. But if you live in other neighborhoods where music is played loud, and if it is a densely populated area, and those are lewd music, as she's pointing at, in most instances, you have no control about that. And therefore, there is hardly anything you can do. The law enforcement agencies are not able to do anything about it. So it's really a new dynamics that COVID has brought about, which I believe is what she's trying to study.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Professor Murungi, you want to round up? I think we have come to a close. Let me thank our presenters for this particular session. Professor Alfonso Lingis from Penn State University, Professor Madeline Georgevich from Towson, Professor Marcos Lope, University of International Integration of the Afro-Brazilian Lusophony, Brazil, Professor Robert Black, and Ms. Tanisha Gibbs. Thank you. I've really thoroughly learned a lot and I've enjoyed myself. And I must thank Professor Murungi for making this happen and bringing us all together virtually to share so much. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bewaji, for chairing, this, session. I want, to thank Teresa Jenkins, who is the technology master in this part of the world. She had done her best to try to accommodate us and help us in each way. I also want to, thank Andrew Rosenblum, who also was instrumental in putting the program together and making it, possible for us, virtually to meet and enjoy each other's, company. The College of Liberal Arts, has been very supportive of this, series. And as I mentioned, yesterday, Professor Bewaji, who just, chaired this session, was to host, the conference last year. We would have been in Jamaica, hearing the Caribbean voices on aesthetics, there, but apparently that became impossible because of the pandemic. As I look around, I see a lot of people who have been with us for many, many years, for more than a decade, who have been very supportive of this conference series, and I really want to thank them. And for the new people in this conference series, you are truly welcome. And if we have another conference, I hope you will join us. Now, in our midst, there are people who are just attendees, who are just coming, and I want to express my appreciation, for their presence. We did not get together to talk to each other as presenters. We needed an audience, and we appreciate you are enriching this whole experience. Again, this is unusual time to hold this conference. And as Robert said, there's a season for everything. And I like the flowers, right, that reaffirm the recurrence of life cycles, and so on, which means that this period, like any other historical period, will soon be history. And again, the flowers again open up, for a new opportunity, for us, to get, together. Lastly, I want, to say, that in some ways, this has been life rekindling for me. I really enjoy, these, meetings, and I don't know how anybody else takes it, but, for me, this is absolutely essential, for me. It makes my life, better. It makes me look, forward to, tomorrow and the day after, tomorrow. And the last thing that I want, to say is an important point that was made by Ortega y Gasset, the Spanish thinker, who said that man, that is a human being, is a novelist for himself. And what that says to me is that again, there's something fictional, something imaginary about the kind of beings that we are. That's why we cannot be realists, so to speak, and be held hostage to what has been or what is. There is a tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Again, the very distinction between what is real and what is imaginary on the face of aesthetic experience disappears, and a new realm, of life opens, or perhaps returns out of the ashes of the past. The future, the present, and the future, arises. So again, I want to thank everybody, for making a contribution to what, in my mind, in my heart, is a success, for this, conference. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
And
Marungi.
anybody
you.
else, has a chance, to say something, that is welcome.
Great seeing everybody.
Are we going to Kathmandu Kitchen for dinner?
I wish, yeah, that would be nice.
Or your house, Richard.
That'd be okay too.
One of the things that has not happened in the series of this conference is that traditionally we have breakfast together, we have lunch together, and one of the evenings when the conference meets, there is a reception where we are able to appreciate what a second place, celebrate each other. And Richard has contributed significantly to this by offering his house for us to get together. And again, the feeling of togetherness again is affirmed through eating together, whether it is breakfast, whether it is lunch or in the dinner, or perhaps not just eating, but also drinking and also having bodies together.
Mhm.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
To the next one.
Yes.
Yes.
COVID.
Yes.
Thank you for this space, Marungi. Thank you for keeping it going.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marungi, and everyone who shared their work.
Go and I'm going to a reception between me and my dog. We'll probably dance.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
All right, be well.
Bye.
Take care, everybody. Take care.